All right, good morning, world history. Today we're going to talk about the different schools of thought, and the first one we're going to start with is Confucianism. So, Confucius was born during the Zhou dynasty. He was born to a nobleman. His father died when he was a young child, and it was just him, his mother, and his disabled brother. Um, he had to work as a herder to support his family. So it kind of helped shape his worldview. And then as he got older, he had a rich friend that allowed him to study some ancient Chinese texts, and that's how he educated himself. Like most people during those times, and what we've already talked about, is there was a lot of fighting in decay in imperial rule and human morality because warlords were always battling against each other. He devoted himself to teaching the key to social harmony. Died thinking he was a failure, and he taught his big one of his big takeaways was he taught the golden rule. And you've all been taught a golden rule at some point in time, but it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Um, Fairly standard teaching in all philosophies, but that was his big teaching. The other thing that Confucius did is he had three or four different tenets that he strongly believed in. He believed in education, he believed in government, and he believed in family. And we'll talk about those next. So, one of the big things that Confucius believed in was education. He was denied that education at an early age and then was lucky enough to know somebody so he could expand his education. But he felt that education was essential to establish one's character and morality. He was a big believer in civil service exams. Now, it's not the same type of civil service exam you would take to work at the post office downtown here. But he thought that every leader of different governmental departments should take an exam to show that they have the proper ability and skill to be a good leader. Um, the civil service exams were used throughout at the end of the Zhou dynasty to the Qing dynasty, all the way through the Han dynasty, and then it was about abolished during the Qing dynasty. Confucius was also a big believer in government. He thought that people were inherently good, but he needed someone to show them how to be good. Um, he was also a big believer in good leaders set an example of how they wanted people to act. So, if you were a leader, you were expected to act in a certain way. That's one of the things that the civil service exam showed people was the proper way to act, and was tested whether you were capable of doing it or not. Um, and so, uh, these leaders, not only leaders from the overall city state or warlord or king perspective, but also all these different departments within the government. And he was a big believer in bureaucracy and all these different governments to control the different facets of people's lives. So every head of those departments and every head of the if you had anybody working underneath you, you need to kind of take the civil service exam to see if you were qualified to be a leader, if you were moral enough to be a leader. The other thing that Confucius was a big believer in is superior, or excuse me, family and roles within the family and roles within society. So there was two different roles. There was a superior and there was a subordinate. He believed that people should always defer to the person in a superior position. This helps to maintain social order and harmony. So you can see on the right hand side, the superior would be the ruler, the subordinate would be the subject. Father, son, husband, wife, younger brother to older brother, and friend to friend. Uh, the other thing that Confucius believed in was filial piety. That is a tough word to say for me, apparently. Basically, it means to respect your parents during their life and honoring their memory once they're dead. So anything that you do while you're alive is a direct reflection on your parents. So if you would do something while your parents were alive and it would reflect poorly on them or would be an embarrassment to them, that is something that you shouldn't do. Same thing after they're dead. So just because your parents are dead doesn't mean you got to carte blanche to do whatever you want to do. It means that you have to continue to live your life to honor your parents. Anything that you would do, if it would be to embarrass your parents, it would be considered a negative on your character. The last thing we'll talk about in Confucius is he had a set of 5 characteristics that he saw as virtues for the perfect gentleman. Uh, the first 2 are related. It's observance of rituals and etiquette. Best way I can describe this to you is if you go to somebody's house and they say a prayer before a meal, and you sit down and you just start shoveling food into your face, they're probably going to look at you and kind of be a disgusted look on their face. Same thing is whatever the rituals are, you have to follow the rituals, and once the rituals become habits, then they are repeated. And whatever those rituals might be, every custom, every city state, everybody had their own rituals that they followed. But once it became a ritual, those were the rituals you followed. Same thing with etiquette. There's it's fairly easy to follow proper etiquette. You know, say excuse yourself, cover your mouth when you cough. All those things are just little things, but Confucius was a big believer in those. The next 2 are obviously linked: honesty and trustworthiness. Always be honest. And if you're always honest, then there's a really good chance you're probably going to be trustworthy. Show compassion. Help out the less fortunate when you can, but have an understanding. Even if you are unable to help out, make sure that you have an understanding and can sympathize and empathize with what people are going through. And then everybody is taught at a very young age the difference between right and wrong. Maybe not everybody knows it. Maybe not everybody does it all the time, but everybody has an idea of the difference between right and wrong. So make sure that you follow those ideals of right and wrong. The last thing that we will have is a video on Confucius, and then there will be homework that you should be able to finish before the end of class. All right. See you in a couple weeks. Hope everything is going well. Good luck to the women's volleyball team if I don't have a chance to talk to you again before then. All right. Bye.
Dove Advanced Care's new formula, enriched with 1/4 moisturizers with natural oil, leaves underarms feeling healthy and protected, and you more confident and carefree. Effective protection, kind to skin.
Most people recognize his name and know that he is famous for having said something. But considering the long-lasting impact his teachings have had on the world, very few people know who Confucius really was, what he really said, and why. Amid the chaos of 6th century BCE China, where warring states fought endlessly among themselves for supremacy, and rulers were frequently assassinated, sometimes by their own relatives, Confucius exemplified benevolence and integrity, and through his teaching became one of China's greatest philosophers. Born to a nobleman but raised in poverty from a very young age following the untimely death of his father, Confucius developed what would become a lifelong sympathy for the suffering of the common people. Barely supporting his mother and disabled brother as a herder, an account keeper at a granary, and with other odd jobs, It was only with the help of a wealthy friend that Confucius was able to study at the Royal Archives, where his worldview would be formed. Though the ancient texts there were regarded by some as irrelevant relics of the past, Confucius was inspired by them. Through study and reflection, Confucius came to believe that human character is formed in the family and by education in ritual, literature, and history. A person cultivated in this way works to help others, guiding them by moral inspiration rather than brute force. To put his philosophy into practice, Confucius became an advisor to the ruler of his home state of Lu. But after another state sent Lu's ruler a troupe of dancing girls as a present, and the ruler ignored his duties while enjoying the girls in private, Confucius resigned in disgust. He then spent the next few years traveling from state to state, trying to find a worthy ruler to serve, while holding fast to his principles. It wasn't easy. In accordance with his philosophy, and contrary to the practice of the time, Confucius dissuaded rulers from relying on harsh punishments and military power to govern their lands, because he believed that a good ruler inspires others to spontaneously follow him by virtue of his ethical charisma. Confucius also believed that because the love and respect we learn in the family are fundamental to all other virtues, personal duties to family sometimes supersede obligations to the state. So when one duke bragged that his subjects were so upright that a son testified against his own father when his father stole a sheep, Confucius informed the duke that genuinely upright fathers and sons protected one another. During his travels, Confucius almost starved. He was briefly imprisoned, and his life was threatened at several points. But he was not bitter. Confucius had faith that heaven had a plan for the world, and he taught that a virtuous person could always find joy in learning and music. Failing to find the ruler he sought, Confucius returned to Lu and became a teacher and philosopher so influential that he helped shape Chinese culture, and we recognize his name worldwide, even today. For the disciples of Confucius, he was the living embodiment of a sage who leads others through his virtue, and they recorded his sayings, which eventually were edited into a book we know in English as the Analects. Today, millions of people worldwide adhere to the principles of Confucianism, and though the precise meaning of his words has been debated for millennia, when asked to summarize his teachings in a single phrase, Confucius himself said, "Do not inflict upon others that which you yourself would not want." 2,500 years later, it's still sage advice.